At the start of the year, we previewed what would be the biggest global election year in history, at least 64 elections affecting roughly 4 billion people. We're now more than halfway through, and there are some trends emerging. According to the international democracy watchdog Freedom House, half of the incumbent leaders that were up for election in countries classified as free nations have lost. The UK saw the main opposition party take over for the first time in 14 years. In South Africa, the party in charge since the end of apartheid lost its parliamentary majority. For countries considered only partially free, there have been concerns about the fairness of elections. Venezuela is still reeling from the results of its presidential election last weekend. Opposition leaders claim President Nicolas Maduro is manipulating his office to cling to power against the will of the voters. Nicole Bibbins Sedaca joins me now. She's the interim president at Freedom House. Thanks so much for joining me. So incumbents getting tossed out of office could be the sign of a thriving democracy in theory. But what do you make of this anti-incumbency trend that we're seeing out there?
Well, thanks for having me. It's a great question. We both see it as a healthy sign of democracy because at the end of the day, we want to see that the will of the people is reflected. And if the people are frustrated with the incumbent regime, they have the ability to vote them out. At the same time, what we see is in a lot of places, there is a frustration with the system, a frustration with how democracy is delivering. And people are taking those frustrations at times to the ballot box and choosing other leaders. We saw that in India with a much smaller level of support for Modi and a much smaller level of support for the ANC, for example, in South Africa.
Every year, Freedom House puts out that wonderful assessment of global freedom based on the level and state of democracy in every country. So is there an interim report? Do you have a sense where halfway through all these elections where the state of freedom is, better or worse, based on what's happened?
Well, the elections are actually tracking very closely to our annual assessment. We assess countries as free, partly free, or not free. And in those countries where we have assessed them as free, the elections have largely taken place with they're free and they're fair, and the outcomes have reflected the will of the voters. That said, in countries that are not free, that are using the elections as a pretense, as a way of gaining legitimacy, even though the government is not a democracy, we're seeing a lot of manipulation. We're seeing that the outcome doesn't reflect the people. We're seeing election violence and a lot of consistent silencing of the media as it's covering the elections in those countries that are not free or partly free.
In a situation like Venezuela, which we'll use because it's the most close at hand, how does the international community grab a moment like this and try to reverse what looks like an effort to hold on to power in an anti-democratic way?
The international community has a choice as to whether they recognize the outcome of the election or not. Now, Maduro has claimed that the election resulted in his victory, but many of the organizations like the Carter Center and others that observed the election said that that's actually not the outcome. We just saw a strong statement from the G7 saying that they are standing with the people of Venezuela and not with the regime, which has claimed victory at a time when it has not actually won. So there is a lot of agency that still exists within governments and with non-governmental organizations, international organizations, to take a stand and to say that they recognize that the outcome of the election that Maduro claims is actually not a reflection of what the people chose.
We have a whole bunch of elections still to come. What are you keeping your eye on, and why?
We're keeping our eye on the election in Georgia, most certainly, but naturally, a lot of people are keeping their eye on what's happening right here in the United States. And that's both because the United States is a democracy that's faced significant challenges over the last several years. Obviously, we also had a recent assassination attempt on a candidate as well as a former president. We've had quite a few things which are making people look to the United States and the strength of whether there will be a challenge, whether the elections will be accepted and the outcome will be accepted by all of the people, obviously following on the 2020 insurrection that we saw. But it's also a reflection both of what the United States looks like at home and the policies that the United States will have as it relates to democracy around the world and how it will stand or choose not to stand with countries that are going through their own democratic transitions.
Nicole Bibbins Sedaca from Freedom House, thank you so much.
Thank you.